As a kid, my father was a scientist, but his hobby and sort of the thing that he did on the side and sort of for fun was he was the family photographer, as many fathers were back in the 70s and 80s. And so I was always around this sort of still photography thing that I just kind of always found curious. And at the same time, my father was a professor, and he would come home some weekends and he would bring home a 16mm projector and some reels of film that you could check out from the library and that sort of thing. So as a kid, we would project onto the living room wall, Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin, and some Kurosawa films. So I just remember just as a kid having this movie theater in the house kind of experience of these old films from the silent era and from the 50s and 40s. And so it just, that always kind of stuck with me. I think I was enamored by the world of movies. I grew up in Northern Virginia, right kind of near the suburbs of the Washington, D.C. area. Yeah, and my family is from Greece. First, they're immigrants from Greece, and so spent a lot of time sort of in between worlds. I didn't really ever feel quite at home in sort of white suburban Virginia, and then we would go to Greece, and I was always sort of not really at home there either. I loved it, but it was definitely, I spoke Greek with an accent, and it's sort of, so it was very much this odd immigrant experience. I always felt a little bit out of place. All through college, I just was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I had taken some film courses, and I got to make a film in my undergraduate program, and I just sort of really enjoyed that. But I didn't really imagine it to be a career of any sort. And both of my parents are academics. And as I got close to graduation, there was this sort of, well, if you don't know what you want to do, then maybe you should look into grad school. I applied to film school. I got into USC. I was lucky enough to have worked my way through film school. I had developed sort of a hand in sound, post-production and production sound. And so very quickly I was able to get jobs. I also was heavily interested in camera. I had always been interested in camera. That's why I had gone to film school. So I was also concurrently working in the grip and lighting and camera departments. And the first few years outside of film school were kind of like a fun playground in the industry. I got to do post-production, I got to do production, I got to work on all kinds of different productions, and I was concurrently sort of working my way through the assistant process, and at the same time I was also working as a DP. I was just working my way through the camera department in my 20s. As a young man, I wanted to get a camera in my hands as quickly as possible, and I didn't want to be an assistant. I had this real sense that time was running out, which is hilarious, when you look back at, you're like, 20, 25, 30 years later, you're like, there's time. But I had this real drive that I needed to be a cinematographer as quickly as possible. And I really got the vision of what it could be like. I was working as an editor on a show and I was in sort of like a bullpen with 3 other editors, and we were all, we got really close, and there was a day where we had, we were shooting The Breeze, and we were talking about what our dream gig might be, and I had just mentioned that whatever job calls me that asks if I have a passport, that would be my dream gig. And maybe 3 months later, one of those editors called me up after the show had finished and said, hey, I've been offered this job for Nat Geo, but I can't do it. Would you be interested in this job? And I met the mentor who had the biggest effect on my career on that show. And it was a travel around the world, single DP situation, owner operator, and I got to just see how it's done And Nat Geo was, sort of my dream as a kid to go and be a Nat Geo photographer, as is probably for almost every person who is interested in photography at some point has had that dream. So, so it was really, it was a really formative experience for me. His name was Dave Goulding, and he was a DP that just really taught me how to methodically show up and consistently, day after day, no matter what the condition, was to get the story with compelling images consistently. One of the most majestic places I've ever been in my life was Munnar, which is a tea plantation just in the south of India. It's in the southern state of Kerala. And I was there doing a personal project, filming a personal project. And it is one of the most magical places on earth. In that time, I just sort of traipsing along through the jungle with some friends. We ran into a lone male elephant, which is the second most dangerous thing in the jungle, as I understand it. The first being a female elephant with one of her, with a baby with her. So he definitely, it was one of those experiences that brought beauty and danger all sort of in one moment there. And I happened to have my camera with me. And I got sort of a few shots of this thing charging me. Which, as I'm telling you the story, I'm just realizing that I've lost that photo and that video in the fire. In the evacuation from the Eaton Fire, I left a box of hard drives, and on those hard drives was my life's photography work.
Late tonight, another fast-moving fire exploded. This time it was in Altadena's Eaton camp.
Evacuations are underway.
It was January 7th, Tuesday, January 7th. Yeah, the winds on that day were mercurial. Kurosawa was known for having like winds in his films, right? Like sort of at the big battle scenes always had wind going through, and I remember that day thinking, this is like a Kurosawa film, only crazier. And I was having dinner with one of my brothers on the night of Tuesday, January 7th, and we sort of get together sometimes at a local diner, Norm's, and just kind of, shoot the breeze, get ourselves, catch up. We were finishing up around 6:30 p.m. And as I was getting in the car and getting ready to drive home, it was about an hour drive back to Altadena. I got a call from my neighbor Joe, and my neighbor Joe is a bit of he's a character. He's a transplant from England, and sort of he was the building gossip, sort of like the old lady of the building who just always had all the information. And Joe gives me a call and lets me know that there's a fire. And straight off, when I got into the car, I knew I was in emergency mode. Ran through a checklist in my head of the things that we would need to grab. I spoke to my partner on the phone, who had just left for work. Was sort of in the pre-production mode that I'm used to being in pre-production in a car, driving to set, all the time, when it's a big day and you have too much to do and too little time. That was sort of the mode I was in. And it's sort of the mode I kind of like to be in. I've sort of thrive in that in that mode. So I had a mental checklist going on the drive home. Felt pretty good about it. And I was traveling on the 134 East and cresting to the 210 West, which is how you get to Altadena from where I was coming from. And as I crested over this big, long banking exit, I just saw off in the distance, the mountain on fire. It was like a flamethrower, a giant flamethrower had just cut a line along the mountain right across the street from my house.
You can see the fire right there, LA County Fire.
There was a flip over car sort of in the foreground, and all around in the midground there's just debris flying. And it was a real change from, oh, it's about to be happening to, oh, it's happening right now. This was the wake-up call after that, driving right into an orange glow that felt like what sunrise would normally look like, but it was 7 p.m. And I got to my house. I made sure to park facing inwards so that I could be underneath of the carport, so the car would be safe from any falling debris, and yet also have access to the back for easy load out. Got out of the car, lowered all the seats, got everything ready to be loaded in. And then I went inside, took my dog Pinky out for a quick walk, had some pleasantries with the neighbors. Joe was outside, and then got to work. The plan was to get all of the important stuff to the door. And then once they were to the door, then I would do runs from the apartment to the car. So I just went through methodically, grabbed all of my dog Pinky's crates and diapers and medicine and food. She has a special diet, and so it was like it made sense to just sort of ground the process there. And so I just loaded up my living room as I went through room by room, looking and grabbing stuff. Got the passports, got the cash, grabbed a couple of bags of clothes. I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I had a couple years of supplies saved up. So I grabbed 3 months of that stuff, just sort of grabbed what I could, had a big old pile. In the process of making the pile of stuff that's gonna go, I started to hit a little bit of a wall. I would say 60% of what I do as a traveling cinematographer and camera operator is move gear and make sure it's safe and play Tetris in vehicles and get from place to place. And these weren't cases, these weren't, this wasn't a minivan. I didn't really quite know, does this pile fit into this vehicle? So I was like, okay, well this is, I don't know where I'm at, but I should probably just start loading the car and we'll see.